Gentlemen, we're on DAF Lamed Vav Amud Aleph. We started a new parak Rivke, which deals with the case of doing yibum or chalitza to a pregnant woman, a pregnant Yevama. And it all turns out whether the child turns out to be viable or not. If the child turns out to be viable, so then it turns out that the yibum or chalitza was invalid because this woman didn't fall for yibum or chalitza. She was yibum is only for a woman who has no children. This woman has a child. If the child turns out to be non-viable, so then the chalitza or the yibum was necessary. But the question is, if a person did yibum or chalitza to a woman who gave birth to or is pregnant, does it have to be repeated in a case of where a person gives chalitza to a woman who is pregnant? According to Reish Lakish had stated a halacha yesterday in yesterday's DAF that when you give chalitza to a woman who's pregnant, even if the child turns out to be non-viable, the chalitza is null and void, because you have to wait and find out what her status is. Anything that's done during that limbo period before we know what her status is considered to be invalid. So if the chalitza was done, it has to be repeated. Okay? That Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. Rabbi Yochanan says if the chalitza was done, it's a valid chalitza. So now we're going to take a look at and then we came along, that was the first machlokus that we saw yesterday. The next machlokus is between Abaye and Rava in the analysis of a brisa. We won't review Abaye's position, but Rava takes a look at a brisa and he teaches me the following halacha from the brisa, and it's on the third line of the Gemara. Omar Rava hachika Omar. The brisa means as follows: Hakones yuvimto v'nimtzeis meuberes. That if a man consummates with a Yevama, but he discovers later that she was pregnant from his brother, the first husband, Raizel lo sinase tzarasa. So based on the brisa, we saw that the tzara, the co-wife, is also not allowed to marry. Sheme yehi vlad ben kayama, ubias meuberes lo shma bia, v'chalitzas meuberes lo shma chalitza. So the halacha is that the tzara is not allowed to remarry. Now, so Reuven dies, he leaves over two wives. He's got Shimon, his brother, is ready to do yibum. Shimon goes ahead, before verifying whether either wife is pregnant, he goes ahead and does yibum with the pregnant wife. We then discover that the wife is pregnant. Now, you could argue, well, he did yibum already, so even if the child is not viable, the tzara should be allowed to remarry, right? No, not so fast, because what he did was null and void. So it's not called a bia, and therefore v'havlad eno poter ad sheyetze la'avir ha'olam. So, and if the child is viable, in which case the tzara does not fall for yibum either, but that only is true once the child is born. Until the child is born, we have limbo in this marriage. These two women, we don't know what their status is, and we have to wait. We have to wait. So even if the woman comes, the other Yevama goes full term, the tzara is not permitted to the shuk until she actually has a baby. Okay, so therefore.
Apply to a mimer also.
What do you mean? Would it apply to a mimer?
In other words, if the person makes a mimer and she finds out the woman's
pregnant,
does that disqualify the mimer?
I don't know. I don't know if it disqualifies the mimer. The mimer is a rabbinic tool to begin with, but you'd have to wait and see. If the woman gives birth, so then the mimer was null and void anyway, because she didn't need a mimer. There's no tfisas kiddushin for an eishes ach sheyesh labanim. If it turns out that not, so then that's a good question. Would the mimer? I would assume, but we'll have to wait and see. Maybe the Gemara will discuss that later. Tanya kavase de Rava. So we have a brisa that supports the way Rava has just explained to us the halacha. That Rava is basically telling us two things. Number one, yibum on a meuberes does not count as yibum. Number two, even if the child is viable, in which case you would argue that the tzara does not even fall for yibum, so let her just get married right away. Sorry, it doesn't work, because the child only exempts the family from yibum once the child is actually born. So hakones yivim tovenimseis muberes. So the Brisa says like this: that if a man does yibum with a woman, not realizing that she's pregnant, and only afterwards he realizes she's pregnant, harezu lo sinaseit sarasa. So that Sarah also is not allowed to marry. Shema yehi Vlad ben Kayama, ve'ein bia v'chalitza poteres el Vlad poter, v'havlad ein potra sheyetze la'avir ha'olam. He says that Sarah cannot remarry because we're concerned maybe the child will be viable, and therefore it wasn't the yibum or chalitza that permits this Sarah, but rather the birth of the child. And the child's birth does not permit her to the tzara to remarry until the child actually comes out of the womb. So that's the conclusion of the Brisa. It completely supports what Rav has just told us. But the Gemara makes an observation. David, you want to close the door? Taima deshema yehi Vlad ben Kayamahu. Halo havi Vlad ben Kayama mifter tzarasa. Lemati havi tiyuf to the Reish Lakish. The language of this Brisa almost implies that when the child actually emerges from the womb, then the tzara is allowed to remarry, but we have to wait. But if we were to know for sure that the child was not viable, then the tzara would be pater. It sounds like from this that the only reason why you have to wait until the child is born is because the child is viable. It's mashma that if the child is not viable and the woman had yibum or chalitza, then the tzara would be permitted to the shuk. Leimati havitiyuf to Reish Lakish. This sounds to be a refutation of Reish Lakish. Remember, what did Reish Lakish say? Reish Lakish said that any yibum or chalitza that's done to a pregnant woman is null and void, even if the woman needs the yibum or chalitza. And here this Brisa is implying that if she had yibum or chalitza and the child was not viable, then the yibum or chalitza would be valid. So Amar Lacha Reish Lakish, no, Hachi Katani. So Reish Lakish says, no, I have a different interpretation. You have to read the Brisa like this. Hakones yivimto v'nimtzeis meuberes Raizel lo sinaseit sarasa shema lo yehi Vlad ben Kayama. So the first thing he says is that if the Yevama turns out to be pregnant after doing yibum with her, the tzara is not allowed to get married. Why? So on the one hand, maybe the child will not be viable, in which case this woman needs yibum or chalitza, but v'chalitza smuberes lo shema chalitza, bia smuberes lo shema bia. But whatever was done to her is null and void during the pregnancy, like Reish Lakish had said. V'im tomer helach achar rov nashim v'lad ma'alya v'ladan v'lad ein poter ad sheyetze la'avir ha'olam. And if you're going to argue that the child is a viable fetus, and after all we should go according to most fetuses which are viable, and therefore let the tzara remarry right away, no. There's another reason why you can't let her marry right away, even if the child will be viable, which is that you have to wait until the child comes out of the womb in order for the child to exempt the women in the family from yibum. Amar Rabbi Lazar. So let me just review, because it is a little bit confusing, but Reish Lakish's halacha is very clear. Chalitza or yibum done to a pregnant woman, even when she needs the yibum or chalitza because the child is not viable, is null and void. So if she miscarries the fetus, even though the Yavam already gave her chalitza, he has to repeat it. So Amar Rabbi Lazar, Efshir Isa lahadu Reish Lakish v'lo tanan la b'mas nisan. So Rabbi Lazar is so enamored by his Rebbe Reish Lakish, he says, if Reish Lakish taught us this halacha, there must be some source in some Mishnah that gives rise to what Reish Lakish said. So I'm going to try and see if I can find it. So Nafak Dakva Ashkach and Itaka worked hard, and he found a Mishnah that he feels is a support to Reish Lakish. Ditnan, we'll learn this Mishnah later on, it's towards the end of Yevamos. Ha'isha shahalach bala v'tzarasa l'medina sayam. A man has two wives. Reuven has Rachel and Leah as his wives, and he travels with Rachel on a cruise. Leaves Leah at home. Imagine how Leah feels. That's a terrible situation. Travels with Rachel in a long distance away, and then word comes back that Reuven has died. But Rachel is still alive. Okay, Rachel is still alive, Reuven has died. But Rachel and Leah are not communicating because Rachel's all the way in Medina Sayam. So Leah, was left at home, she's not allowed to do yibum, and she's not allowed to marry to the shuk. She's stuck in limbo. Why? She has to get information about what Rachel, what happened to Rachel. In other words, if maybe Rachel got pregnant. Maybe Rachel was pregnant, and therefore I'm not shaykh to Yibum. On the other hand, maybe Rachel is not pregnant, in which case I am shaykh to Yibum, and I'm not allowed to marry to the shuk. So until I, Leah, know what happened to Rachel, whether she was pregnant or not, I can't marry anyone. So Bishlama Yevume Lo, Shema Yehi Vlad ben Kayama v'yifka be'isser eishes achte oraisa. So the Gemara says, well, let's analyze that. I can certainly understand why we wouldn't let her do Yibum, because maybe Rachel is pregnant, and Rachel's going to have a viable child, and in which case there's an isser eishes ach for Leah to do Yibum with her brother-in-law when there's no mitzvah of Yibum. So Ella lo tachlotz amai. But the question is, why not let Leah just do chalitza? Let her do chalitza, and no matter how you look at it, she'll be allowed to go ahead and marry to the shuk. So because no matter what, either Rachel's pregnant with a viable child, or she's not pregnant with a viable child. Let her get chalitza, and one way or the other, Leah will be permitted to the shuk. So bishlam atachlotz b'soch tes v'tinase b'toch tes lo. I could understand if you told me that she shouldn't get chalitza within 9 months and get married within 9 months, because we want to wait and see what's going to happen with Rachel. Maybe Rachel is pregnant during the first 9 months after Leah gets word back, and we're going to have to wait and see what Rachel has. And if Taka, we certainly wouldn't let her go and marry to the shuk within the first 9 months, because who knows? Maybe the child will be maybe she's not pregnant, or the child will not be viable. And since we don't know, we can't let her marry to the shuk within the first 9 months. So hainu safek, because we have a safek in that situation. So that would be our first concern. And the Rashi has several problems with the girsa over here, but we'll leave it as it is in front of us over here, because that seems to be the way Rashi comes out. So hainu safek ela tachlotz b'soch tisha v'tinase la'achar tisha. But let this woman, let Leah get chalitza within the first 9 months, and let her get married after 9 months, because after 9 months, either Rachel had a child who's viable, in which case there was never a mitzvah for yibum, or she never was pregnant at all, or she was pregnant but miscarried, in which case Leah has already gotten her chalitza. So once we have verification, certainly after 9 months you'll have verification that either that one way or the other she should be allowed to go and marry to the shuk.
We never resolved the suffix though. Maybe she didn't get the chalitza.
No. Let Leah get chalitza.
No, but I'm saying...
We're saying let Leah get chalitza within the 9 months. And then after 9 months, let her get married. Because Rachel, we don't know. We don't know Rachel's status. Either Rachel is pregnant, she's not pregnant, or she's pregnant with a non-viable fetus. Right? One of those are the 3 possibilities. But after 9 months, we'll know for sure that she either gave birth to a good child, or she miscarried, or she was never pregnant. So at that point, Leah should be allowed to remarry.
Leah never resolved the suffix. She doesn't know how it was resolved, right?
But it shouldn't make a difference. She got chalitza.
Either way.
Mimonavshach, she got chalitza. And once the 9 months are over, the suffix will be resolved one way or the other. Mm-hmm. So the Gemara's answer is, V'li taimech tachlotz v'tinase la'achar tes. So the Gemara says, so what are we trying to prove from here? We're trying to prove that according to Reish Lakish, this makes the reason why the Mishnah does not allow for that possibility of let Leah get chalitza right away, and then just wait 9 months and then get remarried. The Gemara says, you haven't made it any better. Okay, fine. So what are you saying? This proves Reish Lakish's point that chalitza during a limbo period is not a valid chalitza, right? And that's what you want to prove from here? But you haven't made it any better. The Mishnah on DAF later in Yevamos doesn't allow Leah to even get chalitza after 9 months. It just says you have to wait and find out, like Rabbi subtly is saying, wait and find out. You have to verify what happened to Rachel, and only then can Leah get remarried. You don't say the Mimon Avshach. So, but why not? Even if you don't hold like Reish Lakish, why not let Leah get chalitza after 9 months, when for sure you know that something must have happened, right? Either she doesn't need chalitza at all, or there's a child here, or there's no child at all, and let her get chalitza, right? So Ella bar mina dehahi. So the Gemara says, you're right. This Mishnah, even though Rabbi Elazar tried to bring it as a raya to Reish Lakish, is not a raya to Reish Lakish. Because why? The Abaya bar Abba Rav Chinana bar Abaya darmi to Ravayu Shemi Yehi Vlad ben Kayama benim Sata Matzricha Kruz Lekahuna. The Gemara says there's a whole different consideration that this Mishnah is concerned about. Really, I could argue with you that a chalitza that's done during the limbo period is a valid chalitza. But we're not going to let Leah get chalitza until she knows that she certainly needs to get chalitza because Rachel was not pregnant. And why is that? To give a woman chalitza unnecessarily is wrong because of kohanim. Because if you let Leah get chalitza, and then a Kohen's going to want to marry her, a Kohen from the Shuk is going to want to marry her, it's going to require a public announcement to say that Leah's chalitza was unnecessary because Rachel had a baby. Mm-hmm. And so the Gemara says, so what? V'litzracha. So make the public announcement. Who cares? The Gemara answers, Dilma ika inish tahavi b'chalitza v'lahavi b'chachraza v'asila meimar kashari chalutza l'kohen. The Gemara says very simply, it's not so pashut to make a public announcement. Maybe the guy heard about the chalitza, but he never heard the public announcement that the chalitza turned out to be unnecessary. And then it's going to turn out that Leah will get married to a Kohen based on the psak of the Rabbanut, and which they took out a big ad for, but this guy didn't see it. So he's going to meet her several years later. He'll meet her son, and he's going to say, "You're a chalal. You're not a valid Kohen because your mother got chalitza before she married your father." And he will not have heard it, and so it's going to create a lot of problems for women who are married to Kohanim, and therefore we never let a woman get chalitza misafek, right? We wait until we resolve the safek before we let a woman get chalitza. And basically, because of these these pesky Kohanim, we have to hold up a whole woman's life, even if she doesn't want to ever marry a Kohen ever again, right? But the fact is that we don't let a woman get chalitza until we know that she absolutely needs chalitza for this reason. So Amar le Abaye, so Abaye says, I have a totally different interpretation of the Mishnah. You're telling me that the woman is basically stuck until she finds out what happened to her co-wife Rachel? No. Midi lo tachlotz v'lo tisyabim ketani, lo tinase v'lo tisyabim ketani, below chalitza. Avali chalitz lahachanami desharya. Abaye says, I don't even read the Mishnah the way you're reading it. Your inference from the Mishnah was that this woman's in limbo and she cannot move on with her life until she finds out what happened to Rachel. That's a misreading of the Mishnah. The Mishnah simply says she can't do yibum and she can't marry to the shuk without getting chalitza. But if she gets chalitza, I hold Abaye says, that this woman can move on with her life. I hold that you can even use this Mishnah as an argument against Reish Lakish. In other words, tell this woman to get chalitza right away, tell Leah to get chalitza right away, and let her wait the 9 months until we know for sure what happened, that Rachel either had a baby or she didn't have a baby, and then this woman, Leah, can move on with her life. Absolutely she can move on with her life. So your reading of the Mishnah, says Abaye, was a misreading to begin with. But bottom line is, you have no raya no raya for Reish Lakish from this Mishnah. But remember, what does Reish Lakish say? He says that a chalitza or a yibum that's done while there's a limbo period, where until you know for sure what happens, is null and void.
Does this Lakish go anything to Brera on this, in terms of looking back and saying, okay, well, we can.
Right, that's the whole point, is that Reish Lakish's shita is that even though lemafreya, even if you hold of Brera, it's still not valid. Right. Because even if we can verify retroactively that this woman's fetus was not viable, like he said, even if Eliyahu Hanavi would come and tell us that this child is not viable, the chalitza is still not a good chalitza, because the Torah says that you have to know you have to wait until there's a finality to her status before the chalitza can be enacted.
When does the clock start? When you find out that she's when do you died? When did the 9 months start to count in this case?
I guess as soon as Leah finds out that her husband
Could be
died.
5 months into it, technically.
So I guess she would have to verify if they tell her a date. If they tell her a date, this is when your husband died.
Somech on somebody.
She's somech, right. She's somech on either whatever witnesses told her. Yeah.
Shouldn't it be 30 days after the child's born? Because we have 30-day period when we.
Excellent question, Reb David, and the Gemara is going to talk about that on Amud Beis. We'll get to it in a minute. Tanya Kavase de Reish Lakish. We have a braysa to support Reish Lakish. It says, "Hacholeitz lemeuberes v'hipila tzricha chalitza min ha'achin." That if a man gives chalitza to a pregnant woman and then she miscarries, she still needs to get chalitza from one of the brothers. This proves that what Reish Lakish had said, that chalitza given during pregnancy is not valid. Amar Rava hilchasa kavase de Reish Lakish b'hanei tlas. The halacha is like Reish Lakish in the following 3 areas. Chada hada amra. The first one is what we just said, that a chalitza given to a pregnant woman is invalid. And the idach, what's the second psak? Ditnan hamachalek nechasav al piv riba leechad umiyad leechad v'hishva lahem es habechor devarav kayamin. Now we know that there's laws of Yerusha, that a Bechor gets a double portion and each other son gets a regular portion of they divide up among the rest of the children the remaining portions of the estate. What if a man before he dies says, you know what, Reuven's my Bechor, but he's only going to get a regular portion. Shimon's going to get a little bit more than Reuven, and Levi's going to get a little bit less than Reuven. So the Mishnah says that his tzava'ah, his will, is legal and binding. V'im amar mishum Yerusha lo amar klum, except if he writes using the verb yoresh, the verb inheritance, because then he's masna mashakasav b'Torah. He's actually negating the Torah's command. It's one thing if he says, I want to give it as a gift before I die. I'm giving away my estate before I die, not as a Yerusha, but as a gift to my children, so then it works. But if he says, I want it to work through the power of Yerusha, well, he's countermanding the whole principle of Yerusha. So therefore, his statement is null and void if he uses the verb Yerusha. But kosav bein batchila, bein basop, bein be'emsa, mishum matana, dvarav tayamim. What happens if in the will documents he writes both verbs, matana and Yerusha? So in that situation, as long as the verb matana appears somewhere in the document, even if Yerusha is the first verb and the last verb, but matana it gets in there somewhere, so then the document is legal and binding. V'amar Reish Lakish la'olam lo kana ad she'omer ploni uploni yirshu sada plonis uplonis shenasatim lahem b'matana v'yarshum. So Reish Lakish is not arguing with the Mishnah, but there's a machlokus now between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish as follows. What happens if there are multiple sons and the father says, I'm giving as a Yerusha to Reuven this portion, I'm giving as a Matana to Shimon this portion, I'm giving as a Yerusha to Levi this portion, etc. So he uses one exclusive verb for one son and another exclusive verb of Matana for the other son. So Rabbi Yochanan says, it's fine. As long as it's all part of the same document, he really means Matana to all the sons, and it works, even though it's not according to the laws of Yerusha. Reish Lakish says no. If one son was exclusively addressed as being Yoresh, and it's not proportionate to the Torah's prescription, so then it's invalid for that son. It's only valid for the ones that he used the verb matana. But if he used exclusively the verb Yerusha for one of the sons, so then that son is not awarded the amount that is in accord with the document, but rather gets what he's entitled to according to the laws of Yerusha.
Even if it's done orally?
Orally or written, it makes no difference when a guy's a shtiv meira. So now the Gemara, we also paskin like Reish Lakish in that respect. And the third halacha like Reish Lakish is v'idach ditnan hakosev kol nechasav livno la'achar moso ha'av eno yachol limkar mipnei shenasan leben v'habein eno yachol limkar mipnei shein b'rishus ha'av. So it's an interesting halacha which we'll analyze more thoroughly when we get to Bava Basra, which is really the place for it. and Bava Metzia also. A father writes in a document that my estate is now belongs to my son. However, he holds back, he retains a controlling stake in the estate until he dies. So basically what he says is mikanu la'achar misa. He says the estate belongs to my son from now, but also after I die. Meaning that it's partially my son's. My son's name is on the title, but I am the controlling stakeholder of the estate until I die. So basically what we call that is we say the father has what's called a kinyan peiros. The father is the owner of the dividends of the estate. He's the controller of the estate, but the son is the actual owner of the estate. Once the father dies, the kinyan peiros goes over to the son, and the son is the exclusive owner. So therefore, if the father sells the estate after he makes such a declaration, that sale is void. And if the son tries to sell the estate before the father dies, the sale is void, because neither of them are the exclusive owner of the estate. But machar ha'av mechurin ad sheyamos hu. But let's say the father sells to a third party, sells to Yankel. He says, here, I'm selling you the estate, after he's already given it to his son. But since the father is the controlling shareholder, the person that he sells it to now becomes the controller of the estate, even though that's all he owns. He just owns the kinyan peiros. So therefore, the person that bought it can eat the dividends of the estate until the man dies, until the father dies. Once the father dies, he loses that kinyan because it goes to the son of the decedent. Mocher habein ein lelokeach klum ad sheyamos ha'av. Mocher habein, rather. If the son, however, sells his portion of the estate, then the buyer from the son owns nothing until the father dies. Once the father dies, then the buyer gets full control over the estate. And the reason is simple, because the son had no control over the estate until the father dies, so the person who buys it from the son also has no control until the father dies. Now the itmar. Now let's go on to the next case. Machar habein b'chai ha'av umeis habein b'chai ha'av. What happens if the father does this document, where the son is the owner, but the father still has the kinyan peiros, he still is the controller of the estate, and then the son goes ahead and sells his portion of the estate, and then the son dies. So the question now is, what happens now when the father dies? Does the buyer from the son acquire the estate? Or, since the son died before the father, did all of the son's holdings revert back to the father, in which case the sale is null and void? So Rabbi Yochanan Amar lo kana lokeach, the Reish Lakish Amar kana lokeach. Rabbi Yochanan says that no, the buyer gets nothing. And Reish Lakish says no, once the father dies, the buyer gets the entire estate. And so basically Rabbi says that's how we paskin. What's the reasoning? Rabbi Yochanan Amar lo kana lokeach kinyan peiros kekinyan haguf dami. The reason why the buyer gets nothing, according to Rabbi Yochanan, is that since the father still had what's called a kinyan peiros, he still had he was a controlling stakeholder of the estate. When the son dies, then since he's the controlling stakeholder, he assumes the ownership of the entire estate from the son. His kinyan peiros basically takes over whatever he relinquished over to his son. But Reish Lakish says no. Reish Lakish Amar kana lokeach kinyan peiros lavki kinyan haguf dami. And Reish Lakish says no, that's not how it works. Just because a man has a kinyan peiros, has a controlling stake of an estate, doesn't mean that his name is on the title automatically if the title holder dies. And therefore the title holder retains his title even after death. And therefore, if the title holder sold his share before he died, then then the estate goes to the buyer after the peiros holder dies. Okay.
And if he didn't sell it?
If he didn't sell it, so the question would be, does the son have heirs? So that would also be a similar shaila. What would happen if the son didn't sell it and then he just died before the father? Who would be now the legitimate heir of this estate? Would it be the son's children, or would it be the son's brothers? Because it really reverts back to the father. So that's that's a corollary question that the Gemara will all take. But these are all issues that we're not going to go drill down into thoroughly, because these are really Bava Mitzi and Bava Basra questions. They're not really Yevamos questions. Yevamos is confusing enough. But anyway, we wanted to point out that we paskin in these three areas like Reish Lakish. Ein havlad shel kayama. Yes.
Quickly, the Maisa, the thing about the older son gets double Yerusha. I mean, as today, does anyone follow biblical law today? Is that like a real, someone who's really would say that's double Yerusha for the older son?
There's no obligation to go against biblical law, but a father has an option to reapportion his estate, not based upon the biblical apportionments. If he feels that, just like a girl doesn't inherit,
right,
a daughter doesn't inherit according to biblical law.
Yes.
Right, but a father has a right to reapportion it based on his discretion.
Right.
Let's go on.
As a gift, right?
As a gift, like we were talking about. Ein havlad shel kayama chule. The next part of the Mishnah from yesterday's Mishnah was that in the event that a man does yibum to a pregnant Yevama, and then it turns out that the Yevama turns out to have been pregnant, so the halacha is that if, of course, the child turns out to be viable, so then they've done a terrible sin, right? And they have to both bring a carbon, right? But if the child turns out to be a miscarriage, so then the Mishnah had said that according to the Chachamim of the Mishnah, they're allowed to stay married, b'di'evet. In other words, what you did was naughty because you didn't wait to find out if the woman was pregnant or not. But b'di'evet, she miscarried. So lamaisa, you can stay married to her. So we're going to see now a dissenting opinion in a brisa. Tana mishum Rabbi Eliezer amru yotzi beget. Rabbi Eliezer says no. We're going to penalize you because you were naughty and you didn't wait to see if this woman was pregnant or not. You're permanently penalized, and therefore, even though it turns out that she was pregnant and she miscarried, the halacha is that you're not allowed to stay married to her. You have to divorce her. Amar Rava, Rabbi Meir v'Rabbi Eliezer amru davar echad. So Rava says that Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Eliezer actually are in accord with each other. Rabbi Eliezer hada'am, we just learned Rabbi Eliezer's halacha that we penalize you to divorce her, and Rabbi Meir d'Tanya, Rabbi Meir is a similar halacha, not talking about yibum, but talking about a regular case of where a woman divorces or is widowed, and the man that wants to marry her now does not wait the requisite waiting. There's a waiting period. Just like when you want to buy a firearm in the United States, there's a waiting period. When you want to marry a woman, there's a waiting period, right? Right? So what is the waiting period? Number one, you have to wait 3 months to see if she's pregnant or not. And let's say you wait and she turns out to be pregnant. Then you have to wait until she delivers the baby, plus 24 months after that, you have to let the woman nurse the baby and then wean the baby. And the reason why we require that is because if you marry a woman who's nursing, you won't worry about whether or not she gets pregnant. And if she gets pregnant, her milk will not be good for the baby anymore. And you'll say, well, it's not my kid, why should I care? And you won't bother to pay for the formula and the other nutrition that the baby needs, right? And we're worried that this baby will be neglected. So therefore, we require you to wait the 24 months from the time that she gives birth to the baby before you're allowed to marry her. That's what's brought down. That's what this Gemara says. Now, what happens if a man goes ahead and violates the law and either marries a woman within the 3 months without waiting to see if she's pregnant, or after she gives birth, he doesn't wait the 24 months? So, Luisa Adam Uberes Chavero Menekas Chavero, V'imnasa Yotzi V'lo Yachzor Lamasdiver Reb Meir. So Reb Meir says, here too, we penalize you if you jump the gun and you marry her when you weren't supposed to. You have to give her a get and you can never marry her ever again. V'chachamim omrim yotzi ulecheshiyagi azman ulichnos yichnos. And the chachamim disagree. They say, no, listen, we're not going to penalize you to that degree, but what we do say is divorce her. And then when the time comes, when the 3 months are over, the 24 months are over, you can remarry her. No problem. So Amarle Abaya Mimai. So Abaya says, you're telling me that Reb Meir and Rabbi Eliezer are of the same mind? How do you know? Dilma lohi ad kan lo kamer Rabbi Eliezer halcha elamishum de kapaga be'isreishes achde oraisa. Aval hasam derabanan karabanan svirale. He says, not necessarily so. How do you know this? Maybe Rabbi Eliezer is only machmir over here, where you did yibum to a woman without verifying whether she's pregnant or not, because the stakes are so high. If it turns out that she's not falling for yibum, you know what you're doing? You're having bia with an erva. That's an isser kares. That's why Rabbi Eliezer says we penalize you and force you to divorce her, right? Even if it turns out that she miscarries. But over here, maybe Rabbi Eliezer would say, look, what's the worst that happens over here? So you were a naughty boy and you went ahead and married this woman without verifying whether she's pregnant or not waiting until she's finished nursing. That's only a rabbinical requirement to begin with. She's not an erva, so therefore we're not going to penalize you to that degree. Inami adkan lo kama Rabbi Meir hasam ela mishum derabanan v'chachamim asu chizik l'divrem yoser mishal Torah aval hacham yidiraisa mifresh parshimina. Or let's go to the other side. Maybe Reb Meir is only machmir to require you to divorce a woman when you didn't wait the 3 months or the 24 months because you're in violation of rabbinic law. And sometimes the Chachamim have to clamp down really hard on rabbinic law because people won't take it seriously. So they'll hit you over the head with rabbinic law. But when it comes to biblical law, like the possibility of having bia with an erva in the case of yibum, where you don't know where she's shayach the yibum or not, maybe Reb Meir would not be so machmer because it's not. He doesn't feel he has to reinforce rabbinic law over there, because people will know on their own not to engage in any yibum until they know for sure. So you have no raya that they're aligned with each other. But now that we've talked about Reb Meir's halacha, let's continue the discussion. Amar Rava l'divrei chachamim yotzia beget. According to the chachamim who disagree with Rabbi Meir, and they say that if you jumped the gun and you married her within 3 months or 24 months, you have to divorce her. And when they say divorce her, they mean give her a get. You can't just send her away and live in 2 separate apartments until you wait the waiting period. Sorry, no, the marriage you have to dissolve, you have to divorce her, and then you can remarry her. So Amar Marzutra Dika Namita Katani Yotzi Below Katani Yafrish Mamina. And Marzutra says it's implicit in the language because it says Yotzi, which means to get rid of her. It doesn't say just separate from her, it says divorce her. So Amalei Rav Ashi Rav Hoshia Bereda Rav Idi Hasam Tanan. Now, we have another Mishnah that talks about this thing that David was mentioning before. Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer, Kol Sheshaha Ba'adam Lamed Yom Eino Nefel, Holo Shaha Sfeika Havi. Rav Shimon Gamliel is of the opinion that when it comes to human fetuses that are born, you won't know until 30 days after the birth whether the child is truly viable or not. And the reason is because within 30 days, if a child dies, it really means that the child was never viable in the first place. Now Rashi just addresses David's issue. Based on Rav Shimon Gamliel's statement, it shouldn't be enough to wait to see if the woman gives birth before a Yevama is permitted to the shuk, but rather you should have to wait 30 days in addition to that to see if the child is viable or not. So Rashi says, but that's not the halacha. As long as the baby's born, we assume that the child is viable. What Rav Shimon Gamliel is talking about is a case where the child was born prematurely. The child did not come full term. Only there do we say that you have to wait the extra 30 days according to Rav Shimon Gamliel. But by the way, the Chachamim argue with Rav Shimon Gamliel, and the Chachamim say that no, even if the baby's a preemie, as long as he's born, we can assume that he's going to be viable even within 30 days. But this is machlokes Rav Shimon Gamliel and the Chachamim. The Itmar, but it was stated on this statement of Rav Shimon Gamliel, Meis Besoch Lamed Yom, Va'amda V'niskadsha, that if the baby died within 30 days, after a Yevama, a woman whose husband dies, she's pregnant when the guy dies, and she gives birth to a baby, and the baby dies within 30 days. But because she gave birth to a baby, she assumed that she was permitted to the shuk, and she goes ahead and gets remarried. But then the baby dies within 30 days. Oh my gosh. So Ravina Mishmeda Rava Amar, Imeshis Yisrael hi choletzes, Vimeshis Kohen hi eino choletzes. So Ravina says like this, that if the woman got married to a Yisrael, so she needs to get chalitza from the Yavam, so let her get chalitza and Shalom al Yisrael. But if the guy she married is a Kohen, so by her getting chalitza from the Yavam, she's going to be precluded from ever being able to be with her husband. So therefore we say, you know what? We'll rely on the Chachamim and not Rav Shimon Gamliel, and we'll say that the fact that the baby was born is enough. And therefore she didn't need chalitza. Now Rav Misharshia Mishmei de Rava Amar Echazu ve'echazu chaletzis. And Rav Misharshia, who was also a Talmud of Rava, just like Ravina was, says, no, that's not what our Rebbe said. Our Rebbe said whether he's a Yisrael or whether he's a Kohen, the new husband, since she didn't wait 30 days, she needs to get, and the baby died, she needs to get chalitza. And if that means that she can never be with her new Kohen husband, so be it. So Amarle Ravina le Rav Misharshia, Bu'urta Amar Rava Hachi, Uvitzafra Hadarbe. So Ravina wants to tell Rav Misharshia that you don't know really what our Rebbe said, because you know why? Because you were only at the shir in the evening, but the following morning Rava retracted, and he said that if the new husband is a Kohen, she doesn't need to get chalitza. So Rav Misharshia gives sort of like a sarcastic comment. He says, Amarle Sharisu Yehi Rava de Tishtaru Aftarba. So he says, Baruch Hashem, you gave a heter for this woman to be able to stay with her husband. Halavai, you should find a heter for forbidden fat, for chaylev. In other words, it almost sounds like what he's saying is that if you can find a heter for this, you can find a heter for anything. I got a bridge to sell you. So anyway, so the question now is, based on what Ravina says, Hacha gabi meuberes chaver menekas chaver hanasula koin mai. So now our question is like this: what if a woman is pregnant and she goes ahead and she violates the halacha, and she goes ahead or she's nursing and she goes ahead and marries a guy? And we said that what we say is that normally you have to give this woman a get, wait until she's finished nursing, and then you can remarry her. But what if the guy who married her illegally is a Kohen? Are we still going to require her to get a get from the guy? In which case, he'll never be able to remarry her. So mi'avad rabbanan takanta lakohen alo. So amarlei hachi hashta bishlam ahasam kevin dika rabbanan depliga later Rishon Gamliel darmi afal gab delo shav ladma al yavi gabe eishis kohen came to leefshir of dinin karabbanan. So he said to him, I'm sorry, it's not comparable. We can't find a similar heter over here. Ravina only gave a heter over there by the case of where a woman who was a Yevama and the baby died within 30 days. So we say, okay, you know what? She married a Kohen. We're not going to require her to get chalitza. We'll be somech on the shita of the Chachamim, who said that even if the child does not live 30 days, he's still called a viable child, and therefore she doesn't fall for yibum or chalitza. That's our heter. But over here, aval hacha keman navid ikarab meir ha'amar yotzi v'lo yachzor olamas v'ikarabanan amri beget. But over here, what are we supposed to do? There is no one that's more permissive. According to Reb Meir, if you married her illegally because when she was in the middle of nursing, you have to divorce her and you can never remarry her. According to the Chachamim, you have to divorce her, but you can remarry her after the 24 months. But there's no one who says that you don't have to divorce her at all, so sorry, you're stuck as a Kohen. But nevertheless, Itmar, Kadsha b'soch shlosho borach, pligi barabacha v'rafram. But let's say a guy did give her Kiddushin, while, within the 3 months before waiting to see if she was pregnant or not. And then we've discovered she's pregnant, and then he skips town. So now the question is like this: do we track him down and coerce him to give her a get? That's the question. Chad omer mishamtinan lei. That's what one opinion says. We put him into cherem to coerce him to give her a get. B'chad omer iruke mistaye. And the other mandomer says, no, look, if the guy left town, leave him alone. Right? And when he comes back into town, after the 24 months of nursing, we'll let him stay married to her. We're not going to require him to give a get. So hava uvda varmaluhu rafram yirukei mistaye. And that was actually a meiser shaya. And Rafram actually paskin, look, the guy left town, he's not coming back until the coast is clear. Fine, we're not going to penalize him to make her give her a get. So it turns out, according to the Maskan of the Gemara, that a Kohen has a remedy. Right? If a Kohen jumped the gun and gave a woman Kiddushin when she was pregnant, then we'll just, if he comes to me, I'll tell him, get out of town for a few months. We'll call you back when the coast is clear. And that way you'll be able to stay married to her. You won't have to give her a get. Have a wonderful day.
There's a low plug given by people who can't marry.
You ran away to get another wife.
What?
You ran away to find another wife. He's not coming back. So, why do they combine 3-month waiting, which sounds like with kares and a married pregnant, with the 24 months, which sounds just like a...
Why is 3 months kares?
No, if he's being with the
talking about a Yevama.
Yevama, so the 3 months and the 2 months, then 2 years, they combine both.
No, 3 months and 2 years is both for a non-Yevama. 3 months and 2 years is for a non-Yevama. Here's the deal. There's one takana that says that when a woman is divorced or widowed, there's a 3-month waiting period, because if she is pregnant from the last guy, I didn't speak this out. If she is pregnant from the last guy, you have to verify who's the father. You can't marry her at a time when there's a possibility that the baby that's born after, let's say, 7 months could be your son and he's a preemie, or could be just late from the previous husband. That's okay. This is all relevant information, right? So that's one takana, that you have to wait. There's a waiting period, because like they say in the ghetto, Mama's baby, Daddy's maybe. But you gotta wait and find out you gotta verify who's the real father. So that's the reason for the 3-month waiting period without yibum, within just a regular case. Then there's an additional halacha where you have to, if she does taka deliver, you have to wait 24 months for her to nurse, to make sure the baby gets proper nutrition.
Right, but I'm saying those two things don't seem to be equal as far as protecting the vlad or the wife.
In both cases, there's no isser kares involved. If I marry a woman who's pregnant with her first husband's child, that's a legal marriage. There's no isser bia there. Right? It's only a question of the identity of the child. Who's the father?
Who's your papa?